In the immeasurable expanse of nature, in process, in faith and trust and wonderment, we give ourselves to this suchness, this seamless mystery of birthing and dying. Spacious, loving, with feet solid in the earth, we nurture the hints at blessedness, the myriad faces and masks of luminous knowing. Moving as this flow of compassion and deepening inquiry, we engage with all beings in ways that support the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the entire field of life and living. For the sake of all beings, wisdom, compassion, non-clinging awareness. Sadhu. Are there any observations or discoveries or questions to share? Yeah.
In terms of ease, the most useful phrase was the utter legitimacy of other. Very helpful. Sort of, and allied with that, seeing things as they are without an opinion. That's something that I've found really fruitful.
It is difficult to be at ease when we're present with the illegitimacy of another.
With the which?
Illegitimacy. It really comes back suddenly, you realize. I don't consider you legitimate, and I'm finding it difficult to be with you. You know, it's when you put it that way, it becomes very obvious, you know, and then what would that mean? I mean, it's not so simple.
Yes, and there's a sort of freedom in it, and that it also gives yourself legitimacy. I mean, it's like, you know, there's a two-way thing going there. And after those contemplations, I found the meditation on the four immeasurables very vibrant. Seem to fire them.
I've probably mentioned this before, but I'd like to reiterate it again, that these kind of artificial sections of the sadhana, right? So the four immeasurables is one section. It's really good to remind ourselves again and again and again until we just know in our bones that this is not a kind of a sequence of value in terms of, you know, where, you know, if you're really advanced you'll be on the fifth one, but if you're less advanced you'll be on the second one, or something like that. And just a real recognition that the section at any time in our living, a section or an aspect of a section may feel like a juicy opening to something that we tremendously value at that time. And that's the most valuable part of the sadhana and the most important part of the sadhana to work with at that time. And the Samantabhadra, in spite of everything that I've been saying, it's still difficult to talk about Samantabhadra because, you know, in one sense we could say Samantabhadra is a kind of Tantrayana icon that appears as a dark blue Buddha figure in union with a white Dakini figure, and so, you know, Samantabhadra is a thing. Or Samantabhadra is a personage, you know, albeit in some other dimension or zone that you don't get to see. And you know, it's good to, if you're working with the sadhana, I mean, if you're not working with the sadhana, there's just no reason to do this, but if you're working with the sadhana, it's good to meditate on the cover page again and again, right? Samantabhadra, variously described as totally positive, right? The sky of ultimate reality, all good, universal good, naturally arising Rigpa, if Rigpa means anything to you, naturally occurring ever-fresh awareness, innate primordial wisdom, compassion. Each one of these is trying to hint at Samantabhadra, like innate primordial wisdom and compassion isn't an image of a blue male figure with a white female figure, right, in union. It's not, they're different, right? And that's why I say it's difficult to talk about, because we can so easily kind of forget what we mean by Samantabhadra, right? The basic space of phenomena, the basic ground, the basic foundation, the basic place of phenomena, the basic functioning of phenomena. Ground Dharmakaya, primordial Buddha mind, suchness. And each section is when that section appears to us as an extraordinarily juicy, engaging invitation into an enlargement of experience, that's an invitation into a deepening approach of the realization of suchness. Right? Each section is there. And so, we could express that without any reference to blue Buddha figures or any kind of Tibetan or Buddhist kind of special language, or technical language sounds too technical, but even the kind of poetry of Buddhism is a kind of a Buddhist poetry. It's associated with that. But we could approach this mystery in the vast expanse of, in the immeasurable expanse of nature, in process, in faith and trust and wonderment, we give ourselves to Samantabhadra. But if I say that, it sounds like we're a bunch of worshipping cultists, you know what I mean? Right? We give ourselves to this mystery of birthing, dying, right? It's like just continuous appearing, disappearing, evolving, like it's a processing, the living, right? And so in this sense, to me, this is why I have an engagement with such a structure of practice, because if it was reduced to a prayer to a Buddha figure sitting on a lotus throne, although for many people this could be a very wonderful, juicy and valuable support for their unfolding, and to a degree that kind of practice has been for me as well. But I don't think I could stay with this, because it's sort of over there, and I go, well, what about structural coupling and languaging and autopoiesis and cell evolution, and right, which to me is a kind of context of understanding the world in which I see the world in these terms. And so I have to make a bridge here. I have to see how, if we're not talking about the same thing, then it's not working for me. Right? So, coming into the Brahma Vihara, which sounds so kind of, for people who are very familiar with Buddhist styles of teaching, if you know what I mean, the Brahma Vihara, or the Four Immeasurables, is, you've heard about it from the very beginning. It's like, it's so common. And so, now we're on to this esoteric Samantabhadra. It's kind of, the Four Immeasurables. Oh yeah, it's okay. It's for, may all beings be happy, and have the causes of happiness. And then we get on to Demchok, right? Or Mahamudra, or Dzogchen, or something like that. And we only have that attitude because just at that moment, the Four Immeasurables aren't acting like a juicy invitation into a fullness of living. But when they are, right, what else is there? This is like, and I mean, it's quite common, I think. A bit of a projection because I haven't done a survey, right? But I think it's quite common for people who are engaging with Dharma for the long haul. So I think of it that way. You know, it's like, yeah, you have your ups and downs, but you're in it for decades, right? That you would have, over the course of a long haul, you would have many different moments of feeling, boy, this is it. What else is there to do? And then a year later, you're going, oh, this is it. What else is there to do? As if you've completely forgotten that, and you're on to something else. And you know, someone told me that they were having a conversation with a friend who wasn't involved with Dharma, and they were trying to explain to their friend that they were going away for a multi-week retreat at Wangapeka. And the friend asked the question, oh, are you still into that? haven't you moved on to something interesting or new? I mean, I thought you'd done that. You did that, and you're going to... Right? So, you know, you may find that you do something, and then something else is there, and then you come back to it, and it's as if when you come back to it, it's like seeing it for the first time. You know, it's like, and it's not to negate or undermine the seeing that you had before that was, whoa, right? And I think that quality of feeling the kind of excitement, enthusiasm of being in a doorway which feels fruitful and inviting and kind of valuable at multiple levels of being beyond being able to simplistically put into words, is something wonderful. It's like it's an aliveness of being. It's an expression of being in the flow of awakening. This is the enlightening mind. This is bodhicitta manifesting. You don't get any more than that. Right? You know, and yeah. Any other observations? Or?
Must have been in the night here, I think, because I had been using a term, seeing it as mirror, and then this morning I woke and I just felt a peacefulness, and again I think it's from accepting more, but the way Eileen's saying, sort of you're just accepting sort of whatever arises is legitimate, is such. I actually like that little phrase too you put in, such as it is. And for me too, I really like the breadth and depth of doorways, and though you said you only put 6 doorways in that bit yesterday, you added Guru Yoga, and that for me has always been a doorway of significance, shall we say. So,
In you know, those great themes of Dharma, right, which you can blend with the essential practice, right, so they become an essential practice. Some of them I think of as being very easily translatable into, say, a Western scientific idiom. And some of them, for me, I'm much more strongly associated with a kind of Buddhist idiom. Right? And so, for example, the Sila, Samadhi, and Prajna as a way of presenting things, it feels kind of Buddhist to me. The 6 parami feels kind of Buddhist to me. It's not that generosity is Buddhist or wholesome relating, but, you know, to cluster it, to talk about the 6 paramita, Guru Yoga, definitely, it's kind of Buddhist for me. But progressive mastery of samatha vipassana, illusory body practice, and the union of skillful fabrication and effortless naturalness, to me, lend themselves very easily to a completely different language, touching on what feels to me to be really the same thing. We could say that the progressive mastery of samatha vipassana is kind of a progressive mastery of calm, friendly, appreciative inquiry. Right? Appreciative inquiry being on the vipassana side and the calm, friendly being on the samatha side. We don't have to talk about, obviously the samatha vipassana, we'd associate it more with Buddhism, but if we were to say progressive mastery of calm, friendly, appreciative inquiry, doesn't feel particularly Buddhist necessarily, right? And yet you could hardly imagine an effective Buddhism, a Buddhist practice that's not calm, friendly, appreciative inquiry. The illusory body practice, or kind of accustoming oneself, right, to being able to appreciate multiple levels of understanding and appreciating, all kind of just gently floating together, So, for example, in a very ordinary way, you can look at a human being, and most of us here we can look at the person and we can see what they look like on the surface. Like in other words, you see the clothing, you see the facial expression, you see the texture of their skin, and so on and so forth. But we don't believe that that's the whole person, right? If we so chose to, we could recognize that, in a sense, inside that clothing and skin is a skeleton and muscles and heart, and we might not know that inside those cells is a Krebs cycle. Like that I'm not guessing is everybody's way of perceiving. But I am guessing that everyone here, you don't have any problem with that. Obviously there is a skeleton and a muscle thing and, these kinds of things. But also, obviously, they are the clothing and skin and the appearance. And it's, if you, in a sense, you have two understandings. Seeing in Buddhism is a kind of code word, right? In other words, it's not seeing with your eyeballs, it's seeing with your understanding. Like when Kelvin, a friend, I think everyone knows Kelvin, a friend of mine who's blind, and he would often in the past, doesn't come up so much now, but it was very funny in a way. He'd be trying to explain something to me, and somehow I wasn't quite on the right wavelength, so I wasn't really getting, it was obvious to him, I wasn't getting what he was trying to talk about. And he'd say, "Tarchin, can't you see?" which somehow, normally that's nothing. I just go, "Oh, they're just saying, can't you understand?" And I say, "Oh, yeah, oh, I get it, I see," Whereas, but somehow coming from a person who is visually blind, but it leapt out in language, and it seemed very ironic that the person who, publicly speaking, would be considered blind is sort of asking the person who, publicly speaking, is considered to be sighted, if the sight, can't you see, to the sighted person. Okay? And so when we say seeing, we mean kind of to understand. And by the way, visualization practice, right, is the same. We say, because visual sounds like an act of seeing. It's when people think of visualization, they think of having an interior sense of seeing with their eyes an object. Right? So it's very common for people when they're beginning to visualize, right, to feel that if they have a kind of, it's almost like a hallucination, dream, arising image of like suddenly, ooh, skeleton there, right? Then that's a visualization. But otherwise it's just thinking. But actually you can't think about something that you know absolutely nothing about. right? That thinking is based on a certain degree of understanding or fantasizing or, like through a screen darkly. And so to kind of visualize multi-dimensions of the being, and gradually as our intellect invites our understanding, so you study more about cells and physiology, but you also study about sociology and child development. And you realize that the child doesn't just develop, it's just not a physiology that's developing, it's a physiology that's developing in relationship with other beings, especially human beings. Right? And so we begin to see that not only is the person a kind of shape, color, form, not only are they filled with dynamic, growing, living systems of varying complexity, but they're also simultaneously embedded in this larger mesh of relationships and obligations and hopes and fears and intents and aspirations and so forth, which is and to really have a sense of to see the person as a more full person, right? We would have a capacity to kind of appreciate that, and the kind of part where we need to have progressive mastery, right? We need to kind of this is a kind of an art that we need to learn, is that it's possible for us to be more interested in one of these aspects than the others. And we can choose to do that. You can choose to kind of see a person as kind of physiology, right? I mean, this is a crude way of illustrating it, but in my recent journeys of medical things, I had contact with two incredibly different types of doctors, right? And one doctor, right, they worked for the surgical unit and so on. And, my way of describing it was I wasn't feeling supported by them. It was like they had no bedside manner. They were, they kind of just treated me as a physical system. As long as you can cut it open, yep, stitches are okay, fine. They don't want to know how you feel or what your worries are about it or anything like that. None of that, right? And then I had contact with a number of doctors at the Kathleen Kilgore Center, and who were their radio oncologists, and they were just continuously like, okay, how are you feeling about this? How are we working with this? And they saw me as a human being, and it was important to them. It made a difference to how they understood me, because Mary would come to the consultations than another patient who would not come with anyone supporting them. So in their minds, this is very important, that someone's coming with a support that they trust. That changes the way they understand you. The surgeons didn't seem to look at me in that way. They were focused on the kind of the chemistry, if you like. You know what I mean? The Kathleen Kilgore people seemed to be I think they were also very trained to focus on the details of the medical stuff, but they had been encouraged and supported by the director to really open up their view and see me as a person more, right? They even to the point where they recognized, for example, that the person is also embedded in a culture, right? And so they wangled money to build an underground parking lot, because they know that in radiation therapy you come in for 30 treatments day after day after day after day after day, and some of them have to be scheduled in the morning in rush hour, and you might be late because of the traffic. And so they got a special number that you can call in and say, oh, the traffic's a bit bad, and then they readjust all their schedules to fit you, because they know they have to fit with the larger culture, and they have to fit with you in the culture of your family, and they have to fit with you in the chemical, cellular demands of the cancer situation. Right? So I'm trying to give an illustration of seeing the person in multiple levels. And for me, I really felt seen and cared for there by comparison, right? Even though I think the surgeons did a great job, right? They did an excellent job, but that other aspect wasn't there. And so it's not just, they didn't see my needs or my aspirations. The first time I went in, the doctor said, look, I know everything about you. It's all in the computer. That was it. And I thought, well, that's typical, which is just like those surgeons I was working with. She said, but I'm not interested in that. I want to know what you feel is going on for you, what you would like to do about it, what's important to you, right? And then she sat back and listened to me for an hour. And before it was over, I had tears coming, because I just after a huge thing with the surgeons and everything, I felt for the first time it's like back in the realm of humanity, only connected. This cancer didn't have to be totally disconnected from humanity. Right? And so they didn't see my hopes and fears with their eyes, right? It wasn't like if they visualized me, they visualized, if you visualize someone, you don't really just visualize a kind of like a photograph of them. You have a kinesthetic, felt sense of your whole organism present with the other person, in relationship with them. And the feeling in your organism as you imagine being in the presence of them, you call visualizing them. It's all there. So we're in a sense, to translucentize the universe so that we can appreciate multiple layerings. And the fundamental work with this can be very simple. For example, we could be, first of all, just smiling, breathing, present, right? And then when that's there, we begin to kind of expand into an increasing of capacity and actuality of appreciating the complexities of whatever it is we're engaging with, right? We are experimenting with it, right? We are playing with it, right? We run around and look at it from the back. We look at it from a different angle, right? We're curious about it, right? We're engaging this again and again and again. And then we might actually augment it further by in that state of smiling, breathing, present, appreciating, offering, then extending a sense of sentient space the way I've done with all of you at some time or another, like space in front, space behind, space to the side, space above, space below. But more than space, not you kind of suspended in some great vacuous, space, but you, in a sense, nestled in and cradled by an infinity of threads of relationship, right? So you couldn't possibly fall, right? And so it's sentient. I call it sentient space, or I think of it as sentient space. There's bird whistles there, and that the bird went, and my neurons went like this, like at the level of neurons, they're very, very small. It's a long way to that bird. Okay? And the bird goes, and it's like dancing. And meanwhile, I'm appreciating the kind of the play of the light on the leaves over there through the shadows. It's kind of a contrast, and so I see differently when I see them. I flicker to you, and associations and memories, and right, just like going translucentizing this, right? Space in front, below, and I realize that not only am I in space, but I am in the midst of relationship, whether I'm aware of it or not, which affects my living, right? So this is like the beingness that I am now is different than the beingness that I would be, for example, if I was kind of locked up in a dark, gloomy, cold space all by myself, I would be in a different space than I am here with you now in this space, right? So how can you really say for sure with such certainty that, that it's all about what I'm doing, as if the environment that you're living in is irrelevant. I don't exist except for the relationships, right? So this is kind of an expansion, if you like, right? Now I'm appreciating this. And we can spend considerable amount of time doing that, right? The space out, and then it's as if you turn in and you see space in. Like layers of skin and then tissues and the anatomy and the kind of dynamic systems that we are. And you can, just as, for example, I can look at beautiful books on astronomy and look at Hubble telescope things and study astronomy. And then on the basis of that, I begin to develop an absolutely unusual understanding. And that is that the stars are shining right now. Most people don't actually live with this understanding. In the day, the stars aren't out. Right? They come out at night, right? And in the day they go away, right? And the idea, like, I can begin to visualize, sense, feel, know that I'm embedded in occasionally I see these very bright stars up there, and gradually my intellect, right, begins to see them as mirrors, right? Because they're just big mirrors made of rock. And we call them planets, right? And so you got Venus and Mars and Jupiter and so on, and they kind of, and you slowly begin to realize, they're kind of always in this plane, like and then all of a sudden you're having a sense of being on this planet embedded in a solar system, right? And we might go further out like that, and we can go further in, to kind of, someone like Gerald Edelman, who's, I don't know how to describe him, because towards the end of his career he was such a expert in so many different fields, and tremendous expertise in brain development and neural development. And I remember reading Bright Water, was it Bright Fire? Clear Water, I can't remember the name of his book, and I was just awestruck at because I interpreted it like his power of visualization of the detail of neuronal structures in the brain working together in a harmonious dance. It's like, was beyond anything I'd ever imagined, and then of course I started to imagine it. Right? Because by meeting with him, I began to imagine it. And so we might look in, and we have not only this vast dance of sentience, and not only am I in relationship with that tree, but that tree that I am in relationship with is in relationship with its fellow trees and with the bugs. And this me that tree is in relationship, I'm in relationship with you and my parents and my sense of the future and my sense of a past. And so the whole world becomes increasingly like, it's almost like solid. We could talk about threads of relationship, but then there's threads within threads within threads within threads, until the universe becomes totally solid, except it's totally moving. Then once we've got that, then we can add one more thing, and that is that we can begin to occasionally see if we can start to enrich our appreciation of our life, not as a kind of extraordinary matrix of relationships happening, but as an extraordinary set of relationships, matrix of relationships that has been happening, evolving through time. And so then you could perhaps imagine, right? This is quite artificial. These are just kind of visualization practices which will help translucentize the universe. This is a generation practice. You're generating a different understanding of your life. This is skillful fabrication, right? That you imagine, for example, yourself as a fertilized egg. And then with your knowledge, right, perhaps like it's two, and then the sense of the complexities of the relationships between the two cells, right, and the structural couplings and so on. And you may find that by then you want to study Margulis's work and study Maturana's work and other, you might want to do this, right, because it's so interesting. You'd like more detail to be able to enrich this. And you see it growing, and it's in relationship with this kind of fetus, in relationship with mother, and the relationships within, and the whole thing is in a world, because you've already got the space thing, it's whirling around, right? And then you're born, and you're tracking through, but you're seeing it as a kind of morphing of relationships within and without, through time, across time, gradually arriving at this person who's considering this thing morphing and changing through time to become this thing that's, right? You bring it right up into this present. Okay? And then after you've developed some kind of facility with that, you can apply it to others, and you can sort of see someone and you want to understand them more. And it might enrich the understanding to at least occasionally consider the possibility that they too were a fertilized egg at one time. And they too co-evolved with a mother-to-be, right? The woman is on the way to being a mother, and the fetus is on the way to being the child of that mother. Right? And the official starting point is called birth. Then it's mom and child, right? And so you could visualize that like this, right? And you work with other people, and you begin to see the stories, and then how that is interweaving with you. This to me is something which is still occupying my interest. Not infrequently, frequently, right, with juiciness, and it has been doing so for a long time, and I can't see any exhaustion of this. I can't see any end to it. And then, but if you do get a kind of a familiarity, right, with this, you're beginning to appreciate the kind of dynamic space-time knowing unfolding that's taking place, right? You might occasionally make attempts to cast back before the fertilized egg, right? And go back to the first Homo sapien, or you go back to the first primate, or you go back to the first animal, or you go back to the first, however you want to do it, and you're starting to see like interrelatings of plants and meshings, and all of them are giving birth. Like all of these trees are making babies. Right? This is life. It's not like babies come along occasionally and then there's life. Actually making life is making babies, period, right? We're just continuously birthing newness out of our living. Even me, who's not, seemingly having a lot of children officially, right? It's like, well, you know what I'm saying is it's like well, maybe you don't know what I'm saying, but the fact that my genes aren't sort of meshing with some other critter's genes and producing a physical form is only one type of baby, right? For me, like the act of living is I am co-creating a universe with the womb of the world, right? And we're bringing forth this class with, just as like the fetus couldn't bring forth itself without the help of mum, and mum wouldn't be mum without the help of the food chain and the air and the ecosphere she lives in. And of course we do it with the help of others, right? And we are co-creating this as a collaboration. Okay? And the kind of totality of this kind of moving, if you like, right, is like so awesome, right? It's like we begin to intuit this, and then we begin to have what feels like an even a beginning of an understanding and a confidence. We're smiling, we're breathing, we're present, we're appreciating this, right? We try it out by imagining you're someone else, looking back at you, right? You imagine yourself a different creature. Like, as I pointed out, Rinpoche suggested we go through the Larousse book of animal life at one point and kind of visualize, imagine in this fashion, right, that you're a puma, right, or you're a lemur, or you're a mouse, or you're an alligator, or you're a snake, or you're a cricket, or you're a, right, and try it out, right, begin to, like, you're kind of, so you take apart, you become front arising, you become the deity, you visualize the deity in front of you, you expand the deity and make it really huge, you shrink it down and make it really small, you multiply the deity so you have many deities. The only difference between this and the Tibetan generative generation yoga practice is that we're applying it to every type of sentient creature. But the facility of the mind to do this is could be being developed in a similar way. So I just wanted to sort of reiterate that. So these three, like a progressive mastery of calm, friendly, appreciative inquiry, samatha vipassana, illusory body practice or multi-realm translucentizing, because it's only called illusory body practice because we begin to realize that the conventional body that we said was the body is so much more than that. It involves the whole universe. So from that point of view, this body being this body, that's an illusion because, there's got the whole thing. And the other side, it's illusory in the sense that it's ungraspable, right? Because in a sense, they're all illusions. The whole thing is illusory, right? Simply because it's constantly you go, well, no, it's real. And already the real's become this. And then, yeah, I got it. And it's become that. So in that sense, illusory body practice is not trying to say, oh, it's all an illusion. And so because it's all an illusion, I won't cling and I'll be free because I won't have clinging. That's really a very small, minuscule level of understanding of the profundity of illusory body practice. Illusory body practice is insight. Real illusory body practice. Insight. And it actually doesn't really massively flower until after the clinging. It's not like you use illusory body to not cling. It's first of all, don't cling, and then maybe you got a chance. Because I cling to seeing you this way, but I don't see you that way. It's kind of, and I can remember before I really, well, actually, I've been doing this right early on. And by the way, I was really encouraged to take this on board by a Tibetan Lama. Right? And I'm saying that because, it's almost like, well, I got these two threads going, science and Buddhism. But Tarchin Tulku's work and his writing really was an empowering thing for me, right? In his work on space-time and knowledge and on his introduction of Kumye work. And somehow those ones swam together for me. And so here's a Tibetan Lama who was instructing us to have a giant body full of space and all the relationships of atoms and cells and so on. And I thought, yes, this is good, right? And ran with it. Okay? And then found a way to, and he actually wrote on a number of occasions. I never met him in the person. I've only read his stuff, but he was often, people would say, oh, this is a really skillful way of introducing people to Buddhism. He said, no. He said, this work stands on its own, doesn't need Buddhism, right? And he, in Dharma Press, which he started, there's almost like two arms of Dharma Press. One of them did all this kind of space-time knowledge, very scientific-y. A lot of the space-time and knowledge was taught in 350 or so colleges in America at one point. So it was just they weren't studying Buddhism or something else.
What is his name, Tarchin?
Tarthang Tulku. Tarthang. That's like Tharchin. They don't, there's TH, but they just pronounce the T. Right? Tartang Tulku. And the union of skillful fabrication and effortless naturalness. It's like that's really based on a sense of, obviously the illusory body and kind of generation, they're going through each other. But it's a sense skillful fabrication begins to arise when you begin to recognize that everything, in a sense, is put together through the collaborative effort of many contributors. Right? So in this sense, it starts off thinking it's my skillful fabrication, or my visualization of Chenrezig. But I suspect very, very strongly that I would never have visualized Chenrezig without the collaboration of meeting with Tibetan Buddhism. Can you imagine this little guy born in Romford, England, in the hospital just north of London, all of a sudden, bang, you're full of, you must be a tulku, you're seeing Chenrezig and so on, It's like, in order for that figure, Chenrezig, to come along, there had to be a whole cultural tradition of Chenrezig. So, I didn't just give rise to this vision of Chenrezig on myself. But then again, it didn't arise, the culture didn't project it into the body of this little English lad. Right? In a sense, we collaborated together. And that's why the teaching will never awaken you. The teaching, in a sense, offers itself as into relationship. And if you choose to relate with it, then together you collaborate in fabricating, in bringing forth. But in a sense, no one's fabricating, because we're all together we're fabricating. Right? We're doing this. And you start to notice that we can intentionally encourage particular qualities of fabrication. It doesn't just spontaneously happen of necessity, that you're just sitting there eating your porridge in the morning, and all of a sudden, right, you're an egg unfolding, heading towards a porridge bowl, right, decades later, looking at all the factors. You have to intentionally decide to do that, right? It doesn't just, if a fly lands on the edge of my eye, it's quite likely I'll just go like that and flick it away without particularly being aware of intending to do this at all. You know what I'm saying, right? It's kind of automatic reflex kind of thing. But there's a lot of things we do in our life that require our willful, agreed upon participation, right? And so that side we're learning to participate in fabrications that are skillful in the sense that they sustain and support and enrich life and living for self and other, right? Or we could have unskillful fabrication, right? This is where we lend ourselves to supporting fabrications. You don't control it. It's not your fault. But then without you, it wouldn't have happened either, right? We're lending ourselves to fragmented kind of views and understandings of life which are non-sustainable and illness manifesting and so forth. So it's pretty obvious that skillful fabrication as a kind of, this is what we're doing. You're engaged in skillful fabrication by bringing yourself to this class. And many, many other things that you do in your life which have nothing to do with this class, or, in a sense, different things. Right? And then there's effortless naturalness. That's the side when we realize that it takes the whole universe dancing to give rise to a sense of me skillfully deciding to do this. And so it sense even my will is thy will. Right? Right? That sense of me choosing to do this is arising out of the dharmas that are not me. Right? So that understanding from this perspective, we call it effortless naturalness, because we don't have to make any effort and it just seems to happen. Seen from the perspective of the player, right, the engager, it's skillful fabrication. They're not two. Just like samatha and vipassana are not two, skillful fabrication and effortless naturalness are not two, except in the stage of not yet really fully appreciating them. Then we see them separately. So imagine for a moment we've engaged in these essential practices, whether they are very Buddhist flavored, or whether they are or kind of predominantly Buddhist flavored, or predominantly, say, scientifically flavored, or predominantly any other particular flavored, right? We're engaging with these practices until this sense of being in the vicinity of the abode of Samantabhadra, of suchness, of the mystery, birthing, dying, right, is kind of quickening in our being. Right? At that point, right, there's a value in deepening our adhiṭṭhāna, right? And so it could be expressed this way: through practicing these meditations, these that I've just been talking about this morning, through practicing these meditations, may I realize the essential union of profound engagement and utter peace. Surely that's what this is. It's like a profound engagement, and yet the utter peace is that this that I am engaging in, I'm nestled in this webbing of relationships that it's impossible to fall out of. And when you feel supported in such a way that it doesn't matter what happens, you cannot fall out of that support, there's a kind of metaphorically for the human being, there's a relaxing, there's a letting go, a letting be, and it feels like peace. Right? This natural space, right? The essential union of profound engagement and utter peace, the natural space of Mahamudra Dzogchen. And in a sense, a lot of the meditation on Mahamudra and Dzogchen is actually a long-term questioning. What on earth do they mean by Mahamudra and Dzogchen? Right? And when you find out finally what they really mean, that's it. You've finished the practice. Right? Because what it really means is a profound union of profound engagement and utter peace. Right? This Mahamoving, this great perfection. There's nothing more to be done, right? Except this universe, which is in the act of doing, knowing itself doing. Cultivating this open, loving inquiry in an ever-widening mandala of situations and circumstances, may I traverse the path of great bodhisattvas. Right? So in a sense, the beginning point here is a point of seeing, understanding, right? The base. And then we're beginning to go into the actual meditation of Mahamudra, for example, which is familiarization with this experience of seeing in an increasingly broadened and inclusive set of situations and circumstances of living. Right? And this is marked classically in Mahayana teaching by the description of the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva. And in a way, the Avatamsaka Sutra is very much a sutra deeply engaged in trying to describe those 10 stages, so much so that they elaborated out to 50. In a sense, it's not exact, but you could look at the teachers that Sadhana is meeting in the last chapter, and this is like a progression of maturing breadth of understanding, engagement with the path of bodhisattvaship. Okay. May I and all beings come to realize the natural way of abiding, which is totally creative, totally engaging, including everyone, the vast abode of glorious Samantabhadra. Okay? And this kind of huge aspiration that we have can feel really meaningful when it flows from a kind of extra juicy tasting of the result of essential practice, right? And so you may find this like coming up really strongly straight out of the Four Immeasurables, or you may find it coming out of, right? And it's the sense of just, it's no longer a desperation. I mean, you're already thoroughly, you're engaged, right? It's different from the very first aspiration. But it's a deepening, it's a strengthening, and it's a kind of unshakable determination to really go into this, based on the fact that you were already really going into this. So it didn't really take much determination. It's a kind of an acknowledgement.
Sorry, what does Adhiṭṭhāna mean?
Adhiṭṭhāna is means like intention, aspiration, right? But it's more than aspiration, because aspiration can sometimes sound like a hope. Kind of, I aspire for this. It probably won't happen, but I aspire for it. Whereas intention is like a sense of, I will do this. And that's still a hope if there's doubt that you're capable of doing it. But if you feel a certain degree of competency to do this, and then you go, I will do this, there's no doubt, this is determination. This is because you've kind of determined a major component, a major player in the collaboration of the next moment. And that strong adhiṭṭhāna can be very it's a very powerful contribution to a communal collaboration, right? It kind of polarizes everyone, right, in that. So finally we move on to the section called the Yoga of Skillful Fabrication. Okay? While contemplating the following mantra or reciting the following mantra, reflect on the innate purity and non-abidingness of all phenomena. Om Svabhava Shuddha Sarva Dharma Svabhava Shuddho Hom. And occasionally, not infrequently, this mantra, which is, by the way, it's almost impossible to logically and sensibly translate. You can translate all the words, but to kind of put it together in a sentence that really means something, it's something that's pointed to a multi-leveled realm of experiencing, and this mantra has become the kind of cipher, if you like, that means that, right? Even though the words you can't really translate too well. And so a common kind of simple phrase is, in their true nature, all dharmas are intrinsically pure. You'll come across that phrase a number of times in other sadhanas, in kind of traditional translations. Longchenpa, he wrote a commentary for one of his texts called The Great Chariot. And he was talking about this particular mantra. And so he pointed out that this is really a meditation on, it's to enter the samadhi of suchness, right? It's the mantra for entering the samadhi of suchness. And he wrote, the nature of the pure mind of enlightenment is a state that from the first is unborn, all-pervasive, endlessly profound, non-abiding, unobservable, beyond the mind's construction. It rests completely in equality beyond thought and word. Om Sobhawa Shuddha Sarva Dharma Sobhawa Shuddho Hom. I like that because it's like, that's hardly a translation. Swabhava means kind of true nature. Shuddha means purity. Sarva Dharma is all dharma. So all this says is Om, which is untranslatable. Own nature, purity, all dharmas, own nature, purity, hum. Right? So, and so out of that we get the nature of the pure mind of enlightenment is a state that from the first is unborn, all pervasive, endlessly profound. Unborn in the sense that, arbitrarily born. I was born, at 3:30 a.m., Romford General Hospital, 4th of March, 1949. That's when I was born. But in a sense, it doesn't, lots of human beings could say, well, in a way I was born 6 or 9 months before that. Right? But then again, you could say, well, actually I was born when the first autopoietic living system came to play on Earth 4 billion years ago. And it's been rattling on, it's unborn in the sense of, the idea of being born is simply a arbitrary distinction for the purpose of conversation, because I've been born now, Right now I've been born, but I'm gestating in the womb of this moment, and I will be born as the being I will be at lunchtime. Right? So in a sense, I'm not yet born. So as I've often said, I think it can be a very fruitful metaphor to contemplate the idea that we are continuously gestating in the womb. And so in the sense if you're not born, only born things can die. The statistics are grim, right? If you were born, right, this is hard science, right? They've done a lot of analysis and they found 100% of people who are born die. So, we've all got terminal illnesses. It's called life. So the only way you can not die is not get born. Things that don't get born don't die. Now that's very interesting. So living in the unborn realm, what is living and what is the nature of the pure mind of enlightenment, bodhicitta. Bodhicitta Samantabhadra is a state that from the first is unborn. It's primordially, it's continuously unborn. Whatever first you want to determine. It's all pervasive. There's space, relationships, right? Endlessly profound. Wherever you look, then this opens up to everything else, and you look here and that opens up to everything else. It's just endlessly profound. Non-abiding, right? It's in a sense, it doesn't abide here. You abide in the ungraspable linkages of non-existent relationships which are giving rise to you. It's very frustrating for the person who wants to just, right? You can only approach this if you have skills in translucentizing the universe, right? Because then you can allow this to float freely and happen with it. Unobservable, right? We're not observing this suchness, right? We're intuiting it. Beyond mind's construction, and I suspect that what he might mean is what we would say, beyond my mind's construction. right? Because this construct of my mind right now is collaborating with constructs of your mind. Right? So, no, to say, oh, yeah, it's just mind, like my mind I can make. No, it's not. It's totally interdependent with everyone else. It rests completely in equality, beyond thought and word. In their true nature, all phenomena are intrinsically pure. Om Sobhava Shuddha Sarvadharma Sobhava Shuddho Hom. So it's kind of just touching on that before we go into the practice. Then, beginning with the immediately present body, speech, and mind of your ongoing experience. Right? So it's very like sitting here in the grove, sitting in your room, walking down the road, wherever it is, beginning with the current body, speech, mind, and we're assuming that body, speech, mind are more like, you realize it's the dynamic bodyhood communication network webbings of knowings as body, speech, mind. Right? That's what we were meditating on with our smiling, breathing presence of your ongoing experience with a translucentizing gaze, right? Which is like, a kind of a way of meeting with things which has a tendency to kind of allow an appreciation of richness, of mystery, right, in whatever you see. Empowered by a deep-seated disposition to explore and to come to know the world more profoundly. These are qualities that are leading you into this skillful fabrication. Right? Beginning with your body, speech, mind, right? In the midst of translucentizing gaze, empowered by a deep-seated disposition to explore and to come to know the world more profoundly and more compassionately. With this, begin to expand into the wider life of the planet. This living universe of interbeing, interknowing that we are. That's the appreciation, right? I'm smiling, breathing, appreciating. Right? So actually, this isn't so just reiterating what we said. I just jumped back there to sort of lay the foundation for this, right? This is, we're just smiling, breathing, present, appreciating. This is what I mean by the appreciating, right? And that, in a sense, it's not so much that, it's just a poetic metaphor, that, I don't mean that you expand and you become bigger or something, right? But it's a way of, it's almost like I have a feeling of living in a small world of these problems and these concerns and so on. And then all of a sudden I got a little break in it, and I sort of step outside and I have a stretch and I go, oh, there's trees and birds, I forgot, and then you go back to your computer and do your thing that you have to do. It's like, it feels like you're expanding into the wider life of the planet. You're expanding into an appreciation of a wider webbing of relationships that eventually is so wide that it embraces and includes an entire living world. I'm indebted with this phrase to David Abrams, right? Who wrote The Spell of the Sensuous, and what was his more recent book? Becoming Animal. Yeah, brilliant. Becoming Animal is a wonderful book, and it was in the acknowledgements or something in Becoming Animal that he wanted to acknowledge two of his mentors had died the year before the book was published. This was a big thing in his life, and he wanted to kind of acknowledge them there. And he didn't say they died. He said they expanded into the wider life of the planet. Mm-hmm. And I thought, brilliant, right? That's like, what a wonderful term, like, you're not trying to deny death, not trying to have a fantasy, but what about expanding into the wider life of the planet while we're still alive? To me, that really kind of resonated. And through this sense of expanding, this act of expanding into the wider life of the planet, to me is very congruent with what the third Karmapa was saying with the phrase, learning the subtle teaching of mind essence praxis, right? Because, like, in a sense, mind is that which knows, in this case, the wider life of the planet of knowing, the field of knowing, the field of inter-knowing, inter-being, right? And then by engaging in this, we begin to learn the subtle praxis of being this, engaging with this, which we can only learn by doing. You can't learn the instructions and then do it, right? And this is where we're really studying Dharma, because this aliveness is the Dharma. This is the truth, and we're in a sense engaging with it much more directly. Right? So this is the practice. This is it. That's the yoga of skillful fabrication. There's a few more details added later. Right, if you get bored. So we have a sense of, like, with the degree to which the essential practices have borne fruit in your life is probably the degree to which you can feel a potency of aspiration to make sense of really knowing suchness, Samantabhadra, nature of mind, essential Mahamudra Dzogchen realization, right? It sort of emerges out of that. And that becomes the energy that's moving us into now the skillful fabrication of a bodhisattva. Right? We could have skillful fabrication of all beings are bodhisattva, but we could talk about kind of beings at the beginning of the path, filled with their muddles and confusions and hopes and fears and mess, and their practice is not the practice of bodhisattvas. Their practice is the practice that muddled beings do. This is the practice that bodhisattvas do. Right? There's a certain degree of clarity that's starting to come now. It's not separate from what you were doing before, but it's very different in the sense of the richness of implication. Are there any thoughts or comments or questions? Because that's as far as we go with it this morning. If that's as far as we go with it ever in our life, that would be a good life, even though there's a few more pages. I'm having to look very kind of mysterioso, but the sun's very bright.
Tarchin, in doing the essential practices, we become clearer that, in one sense anyway, that there's a part of me that doesn't doesn't feel safe, still doesn't feel safe, and is therefore exhaustingly vigilant. And I was going to ask for your thoughts on how to work with this, although found it.
Well, not yes and no. I mean, the essential practice is. I mean, these are just words which are kind of hinting in a direction. It's like there's a vast array of expressions and understandings and appreciations of what constitutes essential practice for you, you know. And so when we say profoundly nourishing ease and serene alertness and vivid discernment, and you know, we can express this in different ways. I mean, profoundly nourishing ease when the person is feeling unsafe, right? You might call this something different, you know, sort of like what? How do you bring ease to feeling unsafe? Sometimes you can't see a way of doing it that's meaningful, and so, however, what you could do is to bring some caring to it, you know, and then we're back to, you know, I mean, when I've spoken in the past using this kind of simplistic metaphor, say, well, the bodhisattva only works in two places, either in the hospital or in the lab. And when we're in that kind of uncertainty phase, it's what's required is hospital work, you know, and what you want is a doctor from the Kathleen Kilgore Center, not from the surgical unit. You know what I mean? Like that's what's missing. That's why we feel kind of uncertain. And so the essential practice at that moment would be to really care for yourself in the domain that the need is. You know what I mean? The answer isn't to just, you know, we'll see how it's your uncertainty and insecurity is part of stars and galaxies and this and that and the other. I mean, that's ridiculous, you know. I mean, it can sound glorious to people who aren't in anywhere near that space, but when you're in the space, I think for me it'd be pretty useless. And whereas at that stage, you know, what brought tears to my eyes in that first consultation was just to meet someone who was really listening with great heart. And so when I just pause in my practice to kind of listen to my own being with deep heart, that's the most essential practice that I can do at that. And then it changes, you know. Then we have a moment where we're opening up again. And the thing is that part of there is a challenge in here, and this is actually close, just as you spoke. I was going to almost say, oh, there's one more thing I wanted to say. It's kind of related to this in a way. And I was going to say that when you're doing this kind of work of almost like an expanding into the wider life of the planet, so to speak, sometimes there's two aspects of this. One is sometimes your interest selects a particular area that you're particularly interested in. You're not constantly trying to think about all of that, and you're looking at that. And then, but every once in a while, right, put the whole thing together. You know, so you can sometimes look at parts, and every once in a while, right, just have at least a glimpse that this part is part of a whole, right? And this is a little bit like in the Tibetan traditional practice, where we're trained to visualize the deity complete, like just bang, there's Chenrezig, full on every detail. And also another kind of practice where you might begin with the lotus and then the sun moon and then a cushion and then you got some legs sitting there, or maybe you meditate on the rosary or meditate on the flower or meditate on the Anjali Mudra, and, you know, like the crown of the head, or you choose different parts, you work your way around. And we were we were encouraged to, it didn't really matter how you worked on the parts, but figure out some way that makes sense to you. So maybe you go clockwise around the figure, and so you spend a bit of time with each one. How does that fit? What does it do? And then have a bit of time, put it all together again. Right? And so the thing is that when we are looking in this kind of scientific-y metaphor, in the way I've been speaking this morning, we have an expansion, and not only is this expanding, but our sense of who and what we are is changing in the process. If we don't have a sense of kind of having to reevaluate who and what I am, then I would suggest you haven't actually expanded into anything different. So inherently this work is risks uncertainty and insecurity. And that's why, in the Prajnaparamita texts, there's, in the Diamond Sutra and in the, all the texts in 100,000 verses and 50,000 verses and 10 billion verses, and, they have huge, even the Heart Sutra kind of alludes to it, right, have quite extensive sections on how if a person can just hear this teaching and not be scared to death, right, they're already halfway to liberation, right? It's because it's normal, right, to feel uncertainty. And in fact, Karl Brunholzl, when he wrote his own observations on the Heart Sutra and published a book, and he called it the Heart Attack Sutra. Right? Partly sells books, but people have just had a heart attack and they got a self-help book and they pick at this and they go, God, there's nothing to, what's this crap? But he called it that because there was a story, of people who had heard the Heart Sutra, and everything's emptiness and ungraspable and all this kind of stuff, and then they just dropped dead with a heart attack. They were so upset, right? And so, ha. Quirky sense of humor, and so what I'm trying to get at is in this kind of, yes, it's skillful to work on the parts and put it all together, and then go back to working on parts and then put it together. And I might be, when I say the parts, I might be looking very much at anatomy for a while, or I'm really interested in kind of how cells converse with each other. I spend a year on this, and then it kind of lets go, I get into phases, like I was immersed, it felt like, in Maturana for 2 or 3 years, and now I'm less so. But there's lots that's just kind of there now, and so now it's something else, right? Now I'm reading Maxine Sheets Johnson and a lot of her work, and yet both of them become part of how I sense the whole, right? When I put it together. And so part of the skill is to realize that in this expansion, it's not my neurotic, frightened, insecure self that's causing me to feel insecure and uncertain, or however it is in this. This is par for the course for human beings. That's why in these great Mahayana Prajnaparamita sutras, they go on and on sort of boringly, if you've read lots of them. You skip over that part, get to the juicy part with the teaching. I don't need to read this stuff about if you think this is a wonderful teaching, you're already nearly awakened, and if you don't have fear and trembling and freak right out, well, that's nothing to do with me. I pass on. But actually, this is it's worth reading. I don't mean that the text is worth reading, but the message there is valuable, because you begin to realize, this is something actually that the skillful bodhisattva takes into account, right? And so the idea is that we nudge a little bit, a slightly more expanded view. You find if you expand a little bit, you can do that, and you don't necessarily cross that line of invoking, insecurity or reaction like that, right? But if you go over a certain line, you do, right? And there is no value in this teaching of, in a sense, trying to expand your view to the point where you're kind of borderline crazy, right? And skillful, then you pull back. You expand a little bit, and then, and then you just rest. Skillful fabrication, then stop fabricating, and just effortless naturalness in what you have, right? Creative exploration work, right? And then caring for, it's kind of R&R. I mean, even what was very clear to me was that the doctors and technicians at the radiation clinic, they needed to have their resources of carers. I mean, they're meeting people who are frightened, full of cancer, scared to death, worried, families coming with them all worried. This is my work all day long. Worry, fear, desperation, clinging, what's the result, impatient, all kinds of emotions flying off the handle, because people are under stress. So who's caring for the carers? Right? It's like obvious to me that for that clinic to really work well, it works well as long as they also have in place, it's possibly invisible to the patients who come, but it's not really, because it's visible in the sense of the well-being of the practitioners. Like if they care for the carers, then the patients are going to be better cared for. And so again, in the metaphor of our own practice, we are our own clinic and our own lab, so to speak. And so that I need to recognize that is just as important to care for the carer as it is to do the exciting lab work, or, like to do what the clinic was supposedly on about, right? And that sense of however is meaningful for us, to sort of come back and say, I'm here for you, or I'm not suggesting a simplistic technique or anything like that, but the quality of honoring and valuing taking care of yourself in the most ordinary way. That might mean being a bit warmer and a kind of watch a bit of TV and don't do things and go for a holiday, or who knows, like in the flow. And then, right, you emerge, because it's not like one thing or the other. We're kind of pulsations of opening and not, it's almost like consolidating. That period, you kind of open up a little bit and then shrink away from that edge, but not necessarily in the long haul. You don't shrink all back to where you were. Like you kind of have an expansion, which is like, but you can't live at this kind of intensity. You burn out, right? And then there's a kind of a slight relaxing, not all the way back to where you started, right? And in that relaxing, it's not just a rest before you expand some more. It's a time for consolidating. And sometimes when we're kind of not doing very much, except sort of like caring for ourselves, is very much tied up with being willing to support situations outwardly and inwardly in which the wisdom of our own organism can kind of knit itself into health. Right? And so it's sort of like, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'll help you by, you can just sort of zone out, or go for a walk, or cancel all this, or, don't do that for a while. And then, something kind of, and insights come too. Like insights actually come when we're not doing anything. And rarer, I think if you look at it, many people find that they don't get as many insights when they're kind of pushing the envelope into the new territory. They get the insights when they between times when they're pushing into new territory, and then they're kind of relaxing. It's almost like you're not paying any attention, or you're doing something which isn't really kind of exploring, and bing, out comes, because it's coming in the consolidation, in the integration. So to me, this consolidation, integration, caring, hospital size is much part of the essential practice as the kind of expanding into new territory, or the equivalent of meeting new clients or patients and taking on new obligations in the world of helping others and engaging with the world. That's the lab work, and that's our. And then there's this work, and we need them both. Okay? And so I don't see that we're we haven't departed from the practice by looking after ourselves. Does this make any sense in the context of what you're talking about?
I think it's worth exploring. I hadn't conceived of this feeling as being a response to the work I was doing, but maybe it is. I just hadn't conceived of it that way.
I mean, it's not, nothing is solely, right? But in a sense, like well, who am I? Like, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing in the world? Right? Well, the answer to that is deeply connected with how I experience myself in the world. Right? And when I can be asking that question in a tremendously positive, filled with wonderment state, but I can also be asking that question as a kind of a desperation. Oh, who am I? Oh my God, I'm nobody. That, or I could be like, ooh, who am I? It's it could sound like the same question, but they can be like incredibly different. But they're both coming out of the same place. It's like a questioning of who I am and what I am in the universe and what's it all about. And because this is a fundamental thing. We are driven to make sense of our life and our living. And when we are not making sense of our life and our living, we feel insane, right? Like like a definition of sanity is it feels like things make sense. And when the person feels that the capacity of making sense of the universe is kind of slipped away beyond their control and everything, a kind of organismic level desperation grasping comes up. I'm trying to illustrate these things, but there's subtlety in it, and it's not necessarily so extravagant, right? It's kind of like a wobble of, right? And so the way we're living our life, and the way this practice to me is not separate from the way we live our life. It's just a kind of an acknowledgement of what's always going on, and having an increasing tendency to have this insight, like while our living is happening, whereas at other times it's not insight. We're still living, that's all we're doing. But
yeah, I mean, it's the state of kind of exhausting vigilance in a sense is I can see it's been there for a long time. it's occurred for a long time. But
may the day be well, and the night be well, and the midday hours bring happiness too. May both day and night always be well. By the blessing of the Triple Gem, may all be auspicious. Sarva Mangalam.